Okay, hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about one of the most underserved kind of areas, I think, in cybersecurity, and that is looking deeply into what our incident response teams should look like and how to make them most effective. My name is John O'Neill Sr. I know many of you from previous conferences or working together, and it's great to see you back, but it is also awesome to see so many first-time faces here. This is my favorite conference to be part of because of the fact that we get to have one-on-one conversations, sit down, solve problems, and become part of one another's network, right? You don't get that at the larger conferences that I participate in, and I think it's one of the most valuable features of a conference like this. I am a full-time consultant, author, speaker, sometimes poor gamer, just ask my son, but that's what I do now. I've had a 30-year journey in IT, everything from the help desk to the C-suite. I've been both a CISO and a CIO. So my perspective has obviously broadened since I first got into IT. I'm older now, so I don't have necessarily the same youthful exuberance. Those of you that are just starting out in IT, I'm excited to have you be part of us because you bring that energy that we need, particularly in the era of cybersecurity as it is. We need people with some fire to work together with those of us with not as much fire, but more perspective and technical experience, if you will. We make a great team together, you and I, so I appreciate it, and you're going to do awesome. Most important thing on that slide is my contact information. Like I said, we are now part of one another's network. If you have an issue or a question or anything else, don't be like, oh, well, the conference is over, I'm not going to bother him, or I'm not going to send him this question because he's going to send me a bill. No, if I can answer a question or help you out, I'm going to do so. So what is today's focus really about? Well, we're going to cover 7 core areas-ish, and each one is going to include concrete examples from either publicly described incidents or incidents that I personally have been part of remediating. We're going to see how the IR team's construction really changed the outcome. Now, here's a little secret. Even organizations without an IR team or with a really poorly constructed IR team will survive or can survive an incident. So don't let anybody tell you, oh, if you don't have an IR team, you're doomed. Oh, no, 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 you'll get through it. It's just how much pain do you want to suffer and how much money do you want to spend that you wouldn't have to, right? The better your IR team, the less painful, the less stressful, and the less costly because it functions more efficiently and gets the job done in much more record time, and you're going to see that. I want to begin by looking into that a little bit more. Why does the human element matter? Because that's really what we're talking about when we talk about a team. Why do we have a job? There's a bunch of software out there and AI and automation and everything else, but yet I still get phone calls. I still get woken up in the middle of the night sometimes. It's because those tools need us. They need our reasoning, our technical perspective, our business perspective. We understand what our users need and what our organization needs better than anyone else, right? If I work in finance my entire career and then I go in to try and help somebody in healthcare, it's not the same. My technical experience is the same, but my perspective is skewed and won't be as effective. So the tools need us. The problem that comes with that is, unlike computers, we are susceptible to stress. Does anybody in this room have zero stress? Okay, thank God, because I was going to be like, you are in the wrong session. Yours is by the pool with a Mai Tai, I guess, because we are almost always under some level of stress when we're working. I mean, and I would say most people are. But when we have an incident, you're going to see how stress goes through the roof and fundamentally alters the way the response happens. So much so that I'm going to give you concrete examples of where teams have benefited to the degree of double and triple figure benefited from having psychological experts participate on a team during an event of critical nature. And that bottom one, burnout leads to critical oversight. We talk a lot about burnout, and when I say that, people are like, oh, well, they're burned out, they're just going to take a break, or they're going to quit or change careers or whatever. Yeah, that doesn't happen. That may be an outlier, I don't know, but everybody I know that has burnout does what? Suffers through it. I bet you a few of you have been there. You're like, has anybody here ever woke up in the morning and had to spend 5 minutes convincing themselves it was time to get out of bed and head to the office? Yeah, I have. More times than I can count. And that's burnout. And the thing is even though we go in and we put our best foot forward, it subconsciously leads us to make mistakes we wouldn't otherwise make if we were on the top of our game. Why do we have stress? Why do we have burnout? Well, because we are almost always under some degree of a pressure cooker. Not just during a cyber incident, but almost during any incident in our organizations. And you're like, what do you mean any incident in our organization? I mean, when the CEO calls and says, I have a board presentation in 3 minutes and, this darn computer isn't working for me. I would call that an incident because I'm thinking your stress level just went up. When we have a large scale event, what do they typically do? Get on you for answers you cannot give. They want immediate updates and they're not satisfied with, I'm still working the problem. I don't know the scope of it. I don't know. Well, why don't you know? Well, because God didn't instantly infer all the details to me. It's a process. Then we have other things like media scrutiny. Do you think the IT team at MGM during their incident had a little extra stress because of all the news coverage and everybody coming in asking them? And, if they put out a wrong detail, now it's not just distributing to the employees in the company, it's nationwide, right? Everybody on the planet, I guess, with a TV now knows that they didn't know what they were talking about. So that's a big one. Regulatory deadlines, like many things with government, I truly believe that they're trying to improve things, but I really wish that they'd talk to somebody that knows or have a little scientific basis, because they come out with deadlines like 72 hours or 24 hours now in some cases. There are cases where, depending on what the event is, you are supposed to notify certain authorities within 2 hours. You know what? The first 2 hours, I'm pretty busy trying to figure out what's happening. And I get that they're trying to, make sure that nobody hides it from them or whatever, and that's great. But we now have to make sure that we deal with that, and I'm going to teach you some techniques for that. Sleep deprivation. Anybody here ever suffer from sleep deprivation? Anybody here ever suffer from sleep deprivation every single week of your career, pretty much? Yeah, okay. I'm with you. So that is a huge one we need to deal with. These are all things that we can just talk about and acknowledge and, okay, first step, acknowledge. But there are things we can do, and there are ways we can do them where we can get support, I promise you. Let's get into that. I want to talk a bit about Google's Project Aristotle. Anybody hear about Aristotle? Okay, so Google's Project Aristotle identified psychological safety as the number one factor in team effectiveness. If you want to promise a quantifiable reduction in your IR team efficiency, or an increase in efficiency, a reduction in overall time or money, invest in psychological safety. And I'll tell you what that means. Here's an example of what happened and what they analyzed. I mean, they analyzed a lot of things, but this is one example that shows why. During a 2024 incident, so last year, there was a cloud breach. A junior analyst, one of those beautiful new people we talked about that have a lot of energy, right? But they also tend to have a lot of fear and anxiety and that sort of thing. That junior analyst spotted an anomaly. Their initial thought was, well, one of the more seasoned techs would have caught it if it was a real thing. I'm not going to say anything. And then they said something to a coworker, and that coworker said, hey, you know what? Project Aristotle has said we are in a safe place. We are not going to have retribution. And so that junior analyst ended up passing it on and questioning the senior architect's assumption that nothing was wrong. And that turned out to be a second attack vector that would have provided persistence if they had only gone with the senior architect's recommendation. So by being psychologically safe, right, by knowing I'm not going to get fired, I'm not going to get retribution, I'm not going to get any of these things, this very young, very new analyst brought up something that saved Google, by their estimations, double-digit hours on the recovery time. And if you're Google, double-digit hours adds up to a lot of money. Okay, so that's an example of psychological safety in practice. So how can you take advantage of implementing that, right? Because you're probably not the size of a Google, I'm not. Well, it's pretty straightforward. When you start an incident meeting, here's my tip. One of the first questions you might ask after, whoever gives the kind of rundown on what the situation is, ask, what might we be missing? Hey, pie in the sky, whatever, we're just brainstorming. No idea is off limits. Anybody think of what we might be missing, right? Everybody play devil's advocate for a minute. What you're doing is you're establishing for everyone in the room that this is a safe moment, and they can throw out the craziest idea in the world, and it's all right. Because, sometimes when you throw 1,000 things at the wall, one or two of them stick. And that's a great way to establish that kind of psychological security without saying, hey, say whatever you want, it's safe, whatever, because guess what? They don't believe you when you say that. So unless your organization has been like Google and established it in process and document and handbooks and all that, you can do it a little bit more slyly by just asking that. And then another thing to do later on is establish a no blame post-mortem culture, right? Be the IT folks you are and go straight to just data-driven analysis, right? We just want to look at the facts. Just the facts, ma'am. Anybody here old enough to know that reference? Thank God. What should our team look like? Well, from the base team model, obviously we need technical specialists with deep expertise. So if you believe that you have a breach on your network, you probably need a network infrastructure engineer or architect to be involved, because if you just have an operating system expert and she's looking at all the servers and everything else, then you might miss somebody who's hiding in an on-patch Cisco switch or something like that, right? All those things are just computers running software. It's just different software you're not used to. And you know the number one thing I find that's not patched? Network infrastructure. Nobody thinks to patch the software that's running on their Wi-Fi access points, their switches, their routers. Hopefully they're patching the firewall, but there's a lot more involved. So technical specialists with deep expertise, incident commanders with decision authority. If your incident response team has all decisions have to flow through the CIO or, God forbid, the CFO, your incident response is going to take a really long time. So you need incident commanders kind of on the ground with decision-making authority, at least for the bulk of the decisions you might make. And we'll get into some of those. Obviously, we talk about legal compliance advisors. Many of us don't have legal teams. So a lot of this is, if you do have legal counsel, then obviously you would use them even if they're external. But my advice here is, if you take this information and you create your IT team or your IR team and you have all that, then you do what you do with other things in your company, and you send it out well in advance to a legal expert and say, hey, is there anything in here that's going to get me in trouble? And have them vet it in advance, right? Because you can't stop while you're in an incident. So pre-vet, if you will. The one that I see least, and it is one of the most important, is that document specialist. Anybody in here have cyber insurance? Okay. I've done whole workshops on cyber insurance, and Dave loves to say that I am one of the weirdest persons on the earth because I love diving through insurance policies. And I tell him that he and I have very different definitions of the word love. Just because I do it doesn't mean I love it. But I can tell you that, one, insurance companies are for profit. Two, if it is a small claim, you're golden. They don't tend to look very, very big. If it is not a small claim, they are going to probe and analyze and make you very uncomfortable looking at every decision you made, every action you took. And if you did anything to compromise evidence, like for instance, you wiped the CEO's computer that was infected because you had to get him back up, guess who's not getting paid? You cannot destroy evidence. It is in violation of the terms of the policy. Every single policy that I've read. So don't do it. So you need to have documentation specialists that say, this is everything we did, this is how we did it, this is how we maintained chain of custody, all those different things. And that scribe can be anyone. It doesn't have to be an IT team member. It just has to be somebody that, okay, they don't have to worry about their normal responsibilities today. They can worry about, oh, that was good, I almost fell. they can worry about following us. And so let's take a minute and talk, again, real world example, JP Morgan Chase. I picked this one because I have a Chase account and, well, kind of want to know. So they have a IR program that defines one commander per 5 technical staff. Like I said, it doesn't have to be, you don't want it to be the CIO or the CFO, but it's one commander with decision-making authority that those 5 tech staff interface with when they need approval to do something. They have a dedicated scribe for documentation, and they rotate their communication lead every 4 hours. Anybody want to guess why? The communication lead is actually one of the most stressed positions during a response. Dave has a great name for them, but it's inappropriate in this context. But let's just say they're your shield. Their job is not just to keep everybody updated appropriately and all that, but it's to keep everybody, including the CEO, off your back so you can do your work, right? But we don't want them burning out either. So we need to rotate that position. And that also creates some change up with the people that were focused on tech and keeps perspective fresh. Well, they had a 2023 incident a couple years ago. Might have heard of it. And one of the things that they did really well, I think, during that attack, it was a advanced persistent threat, APT attack. They had a dedicated devil's advocate role. So remember I talked about a safe space and psychological safety or whatever? They took it one step further and they said, hey, Jim, your role in all these meetings for the next 4 hours is whatever you hear, play devil's advocate. Tell me why it might break. Tell me what problems it might cause. Tell me all the negative things you can think of. Whoa. But it avoided tunnel vision. It avoided the group getting together and just kind of zooming in one direction and missing some perspective. By their report, they say that perspective is what allowed them to capture lateral movement on their network from the attacker. Had they not had it, they would not have spotted that movement when they did. I'm sure they would have eventually, but how much more would it have cost them? So, great role. And you want to also make sure that you have primary and secondary assignees for each role so that you have 24/7 coverage. And if you're like, well, I only have a 2-person IT team, you're going to have to do a couple things. One, you're going to want to make sure that you're flipping roles every once in a while. And 2, you're going to have to take a break. And we're going to look at Microsoft's response. And one of their VPs, Brent, who took a lot of flack, but he insisted on sleep breaks. And I truly believe that not only did he improve the response, but he improved his employee retention after the fact. Leadership. Each of you, regardless of your position, you may be CIO, you may be the help desk manager, you may be the help desk technician, you will have a leadership role during an incident to some degree. Obviously, the higher up on the food chain, kind of the greater that is, but there are some things that you have to do and you have to encourage others to do. Obviously, maintain calmness. Getting heated and upset never accomplishes anything. Maybe makes you feel better in that particular moment, but then usually you will end up regretting it, right? And that regret weighs on you while you should be thinking about other things. And it weighs heavy on whoever you did it. So maintain calmness, seek first to understand, then to explain. Does that make sense to everyone? Means you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen more, talk less. This coming from a guy who makes money running his trap all day. I know. But that is probably one of the best leadership pieces of advice that I was ever given and that I can share. Seek first to understand what they need to tell you, then to explain. Even if you walked in with, I need him to do this, I need him to do this, I need him to do this, just shut up for a minute, let them speak, then talk. Enforce rest rotation. I don't care how urgent it is or even how much money is being lost. You will, just statistically speaking, lose more if you don't heed this advice. 2 examples I want to give here. Remember I mentioned Brett Arsenault from Microsoft? During the 2021 SolarWinds crisis, he did a few things. One, he implemented implementation firewalls. Or information firewall, sorry, I said that wrong. And what do you think that means? He basically set up and became a shield and said, only designated leads can request updates. Not just anyone can come up to an IT person and ask them for updates. Only designated leads can ask for updates from engineers, tech specialists, and he enforced mandatory 6-hour rest periods, even when his fellow executives pushed back. He put his job on the line. But he said, no, they need to take a break. They need to take a nap. And enforced 6-hour periods. And the result of those actions, besides the fact that we all know it took 3 weeks before they completely restored operations and we were all making fun of them and all these different things, they had 0 critical mistakes during that 3-week resolution. That's almost unheard of. So 0 critical mistakes. And the key technique to use here, who here has heard of OODA? Couple, right? OODA is observe, orient, decide, act. It's essentially what I said, right? Listen first, seek first to understand, then to explain. You are observing the situation, the data that you're giving. You're going to orient yourself to that. Okay, what's this mean in perspective? And then you're going to make a decision. It may be incomplete. It probably will be incomplete data, but you still have to make a decision. But you've done the best you can by making sure you listen first. And once you make that decision, don't look back. Don't second guess yourself. Don't do anything else. Act and move forward. And then when those actions produce more information, guess what you do? Observe, orient, decide, act. It's a loop. You just keep doing it. OODA. It's great for rapid decision making with incomplete data. which is where we live, right? Decision under pressure. So Amazon takes a two-way door versus one-way door decision making framework. And what they mean by that is a two-way decision is a decision that involves a 70% confidence threshold. I'm pretty sure this is going to have this result. That only requires a single approver. So that incident commander, if you will, can approve that. Then one-way decisions are irreversible. That's why they call them two-way and one-way. A two-way decision is reversible, if you will. A one-way decision is pretty irreversible. So think like data deletion. I'm going to wipe this machine. I'm going to do that kind of thing. That requires a committee approval or two or more people to review the data before the decision. So their thresholds are 70% and 90%. You don't necessarily have to make a numerical threshold. You can just predefine certain things like, hey, we really don't care about the data on laptops or computers because our company policy and configuration is all of our stuff is on the servers. So endpoints don't really matter to us. So those can be a two-way decision. But, you know, if I'm going to wipe and reload a server, that might be a one-way decision that requires multiple people to be involved in it. And they published that during the 2023 AWS outage, that ability to have those two-way decisions made by a single individual lower in the hierarchy saved about 4 hours on their response time. And again, 4 hours for Amazon, a lot of money. And they, you know, then published that the one-way decisions that they had to make saved them negative legal exposure on certain customer notifications and things like that. So I would say that from a time perspective, your two-way decisions should be able to be handled in 15 minutes or less. Remember I said even bad IR teams succeed? One example that I always see in what I would call a bad IR team, or, you know, if I want to be politically correct, an IR team with opportunity for improvement, is they've got either no time defined for decision making, or it's, you know, 4 hours or 5 hours. That's unreasonable. If your entire organization is down, waiting 4 hours for a decision is untenable. So I would say 15 minutes. That's the number I define. A two-way decision shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. You got a single approver, and they should be readily available, so you should be able to get an answer and get to it in 15 minutes. Those two-way decisions that require multiple people, I still won't give you 4 hours. I'll give you 1. You've got 1 hour, and the CEO or whoever's involved should know this, that, hey, when your communications person said we have an event, they know that they might be getting a phone call or whatever, but you need to define it so that 1 hour is kind of your max upper limit on that. And the lower you get that, the better the performance. Oh, by the way, that bottom one, consensus without paralysis, I put that there for a reason. When I go in and I consult with organizations about building or enhancing their incident response, this is one of the things I almost immediately see. So I seek first to understand. I do a tabletop exercise, or I listen, I have them run through and I look at things. And I almost always notice that there is some degree of paralysis preventing consensus, right? Two people won't agree and nobody will intervene and say, okay, well, I got conflicting information. This is what we're going to do. You have to have that predefined, that we're going to spend a max of 5 minutes discussing each possible topic, and if we cannot reach consensus, I win. I'll decide, but I'll also take the heat if it goes wrong. That's why you end up with paralysis. Everybody wants to make the decision. That's the paralysis. Nobody wants to take the heat for it. Somebody has to be willing to take the heat. And, it should be, in my opinion, the CISO or the CIO, because that's their job. That's what they get paid for. But if it isn't, if you want to solve the problem, somebody has to be willing to step up and say, fine, put the target on my back, but let's move forward. Because if you don't, you'll have paralysis and everything will grind to a halt. Communication strategies. Anybody want to guess the number one reason why incident responses are considered failed? Bad communication. Bad communication. And this is both internally and externally. Like if you go in and you ask management, whatever, and you say, hey, we're doing our post-mortem. What did you think about our response to that incident? If they say it stunk, odds are it has nothing to do with your technical response or the time it took you. It has to do with how you communicated. One really strong pro tip I can give you for this: establish a single source of truth. If you were in my session yesterday on Intra-Connect, we talked a lot about identity management and that kind of thing, and you heard me beat to death the concept of why I want everybody to have one identity management system. You have to have one start of authority or single source of truth that if there is a disagreement, it wins, right? And we want that to be Active Directory and identity, but in an incident response, that is your dedicated communication liaison, whoever it is. But they need to decide on the message that will be delivered, and then everybody has to deliver that message whether they like it or not. Don't be the guy or the gal that's like, well, I don't agree with him, so yeah, Joe said I'm supposed to tell you this, but I think that's really dumb and this and that or whatever. Yet that leads to all sorts of problems downstream. Just tote the department line and move forward and focus on the technical stuff, because with a single source of truth, even if it's wrong, at least it's wrong in unison. And there's some strength in that. Netflix had a streaming outage in 2023, 2 years ago. Let's talk about how they succeeded in terms of communication when that goes. Well, first off, they did disciplined updates every 30 minutes. Don't come interrupt our engineers every 12 minutes or whatever. Every 30 minutes, we will release an update. And they release them to executives and hourly to customers, okay? They follow a BLUF approach. We're in IT, we love acronyms, right? Everything has to have an acronym. BLUF is bottom line up front. What do I mean by that? It's real simple. I'm the CIO. He's my level 1 help desk technician, and I come in and I go, when's this going to be fixed? He's probably not feeling great at this moment, and he wants to give me the answer he thinks I want to hear. Don't do it. Don't fall victim to giving the answer you think they want to hear. Answer the question they asked. The bottom line, I don't know. Bottom line, could be 2 days. Well, that's unacceptable. I'm sorry, that's what the data shows. You don't have to be a jerk like me and say, well, like it or not, that's what it is. I assure you, if you try to give them the answer they want, they will etch that in their brain and beat you to death with it later. So unless you somehow got lucky, he's like, get out of my face, man. He's like, unless you somehow get lucky and you're right, which almost never happens, they will beat you to death with it later. So you are far better off to just give them the bottom line, which is typically, we don't know yet. And that's a secret you can use. Unless you're a one-person IT team. Anybody in here a one-person IT team? Yeah, I figured there'd be a few of you. You can't use this trick. The rest of you, and this is actually a trick I learned as a CISO, and then a CIO. Executives, pay attention to when they send emails or that kind of thing. What do they always do? They rarely speak in the singular. They almost always speak in the plural. We don't know yet. We're working the problem as fast as possible, but right now it looks like 10 hours. Now, the one thing that they do is, like I said, if you're the incident commander, then you go singular, right? We are working the problem and don't know yet, but I am estimating 10 hours. Your choice of words can really help you more effectively manage the communications and the backlash that will come from them. The term stakeholder simply means everyone and anyone with any sort of interest in your system, right? Could be shareholders, could be board of directors, could be fellow employees, could be partners, customers, right? It's anybody that has a stake in this. Those are stakeholders. And we talk about them in large because they all have different needs, don't they, in terms of communication. And in advance, you should kind of try and map out. You don't have to get down to the minutia. I built a quality control system once for production, and the engineer's like, well, we have 80 different scrap reasons. And I'm like, oh, so you have so many reasons that actually you catch a bunch of data that just becomes white noise that you do nothing with. I want you to tell me what the top 5 reasons are, and this control is going to have 5 buttons on them, and you're going to train people to pick one of those 5. Well, we're going to miss this, and we're going to miss this. And I mean, this guy was a structural engineer. I'm not a structural engineer, but when it went up the food chain, guess whose idea won? I wouldn't tell the story if it wasn't me. So same kind of deal. You don't have to cover every group. You can bulk it into, these are going to be employees, these are going to be customers, these are going to be executives and boards, whatever. Cloudflare's approach during, not yesterday's or the other day's outage, but 2022. CEO received 5-minute briefings every hour. Customers got status page updates every 30 minutes. And they produced a detailed root cause analysis within 24 hours. Obviously after the event. So that's what they established for their timeline. But how did they actually manage to handle such short order customer notice? They did what I told you to do earlier. They drafted, long before this happened, 5 pre-written escalation levels of public statements, right? So not full of technical details, but you know, annoying, kind of bad, bad, horrible, asteroid is about to hit the earth and end all life we know. Okay. And then they had those pre-vetted by legal. So there was no delay in that, right? They just had to pick which one to release when. It was all pre-drafted and scripted. So that's not a bad thing. Cross-team collaboration. This is another great point where we see IR teams fail. And as I mentioned earlier, well, let me back up. Who in here doesn't have any formally defined IR team? Don't worry, raise your hand. Okay. Yeah. You'll still succeed. Don't worry. If something happens, I'm confident you're going to figure it out. You're just going to be really annoyed and really stressed and need a lot of counseling after the fact, I guess. And you can avoid that. That's what this is all to teach you about, is to take my experience building these things and working with organizations and everything else to make it a little less horrible for you and for your organization. And one of the pro tips here from me, just like I said, pre-vet those communications, is break down silos long before you have an event. What would an example of a silo be? Well, we don't have to look any further than another financial organization that has had an incident in recent memory, Capital One. Guess what they found? They found that the network team called systems nodes, while the security team called them assets. That caused 2 hours of confusion during the incident, because in emails going back and forth, network guy's reading one from the security gal and she's like calling it an asset, and he goes, "What's an asset?" And he sends back and says, "Do you mean nodes?" And she's like, "No, it's not a node. A node is one of your switch things or whatever." And it caused 2 hours of confusion, right? And that could have easily been avoided if they had in advance caused those teams to work together, do tabletop exercises, do these different things where they identified that disconnect and then rectified it. They're large enough, they created a terminology guide, right, that they distribute to IT people, just another piece of documentation. I don't think that's necessary unless you're huge. What I do think is necessary is talking to one another when you're not under super amounts of stress, and making sure that you can communicate in an effective way and know what each other means. Now, they did something that I love. The security infrastructure and development teams train together monthly using game days, right? They're gamifying it. So they're doing a couple things. One, they're team building. But two, they're also breaking down silos, barriers, right? I don't know if any of you have in your organization where, you know, one group talks smack on another group, that kind of thing, but I see that a lot. And if you're a small one person, two person, whatever shop, you may have that between you and your customer base. Maybe the people in finance think IT's entire existence is just to make their life annoying. Well, guess what? They're going to make your life annoying when you're trying to deal with them during an incident. So the time to improve that relationship is now. I implemented at a manufacturing organization, I found out, I used to walk the plant floor and I would talk to people and then the offices. I found out that I had an employee on my team that had been an employee for 10 years, and 90% of the people in the office didn't know who he was. That's a problem. So I implemented a process where during, we had daily stand-up meetings, but then we had one meeting a week that was longer, and I made every teammate once a week report on someone in the company, not in IT, that they met, and somebody that told them something during conversation. It didn't have to be IT related. It could, but it didn't have to be, what's their interest? When did they join the company? Whatever. But I made them get FaceTime with their customers. The satisfaction scores on our help desk tickets went through the roof in 6 weeks. And all I did was force them to once a week walk across the parking lot, because our building was here, the parking lot was here, and the manufacturing facility was here, and walk the office floor and the plant floor. So do the same thing if you want to have an effective IR response and your user base isn't necessarily the friendliest with some of your group. Get out there and try. Tell them about your kids. Ask them what sports their kids play, whatever. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. You don't have to invite these people over for Thanksgiving. But what your goal is, well, I'm going to give you 2 goals, because these were my 2 goals. 1, when you send a message during an incident, your face pops up in their head. They now have a human on the other side of this telling them that, because I guarantee you they will be much more accepting of a message from somebody that they perceive as human than just a computer message, right? And number 2, I wanted to create an environment where we ended up with champions throughout the facility that when other people are like, man, why does IT take so long? Why are they doing this? Why or whatever? Inevitably, there was one person that's like, hey, you know what? I've talked to them numerous times. I know that they're working their best. They're doing everything they can. Cut them some slack. You're not going to get that from everybody, but in my experience, if they've met 10 people, one of them will. And that is powerful. Let's talk about those tabletop exercises. Microsoft's tabletop methodologies. For those of you that don't know, I am a dual Microsoft MVP, security, go figure, and cloud and data center, so Azure. Microsoft's tabletop is a really cool, simple, effective methodology, I think. They start with a known scenario. So ransomware. That's today's tabletop exercise. We have a ransomware incident. Then they inject complications. What do I mean by complications? Oh, the primary responder on our IR team for ransomware has a family emergency. They're unavailable. How do we deal? The backup communication channel failed. So that primary guy was unavailable. The backup guy did a horrible job. And they just keep injecting these complications. What are some other complications? CEO demands an immediate public statement right now. I could be like some speakers and just go, oh, I'll just tell the CEO to pound salt. That doesn't work. And that is a really poor career decision. Don't do it. But there are ways to handle it. And that's what this exercise is for. How about, let's talk about that MGM and the media. The media incorrectly reports that this event had massive data theft. Can you imagine if you're a publicly held company and the media reports that you've had massive data theft, what do you think happens to your stock? It goes down faster than Velocicoaster. Okay. So how do we deal with that? And then what I want you to do during these exercises is score as a team, not individuals, as a team, score yourselves on decision making time and quality. I mean, that's subjective, but time. Score yourself on stakeholder updates. Score yourself on stress management. Okay, for $1 million paid by that guy. Sorry. Anybody want to point out what I haven't said yet? I know, it's early. I haven't said technical. I said score on 3 different things, and none of them were technical. Yes, you have to score on the technical resolution, but don't just score on the technical resolution. That's my point. My suggestion on these is run them monthly if you can. They don't have to be long. They can be an hour or 2, right? But at least once or twice a year, depending on the size of your organization. If you're a very large organization, I would say 4 times a year, so quarterly. Run an 8-hour exercise. Because most incidents that fall under the category of what we're talking about with high stress and everything else are going to be an 8-hour-long incident. So a tabletop exercise that lasts an hour doesn't really represent what it'll look like or feel like for you, right? I mean, there is a horrible, horrible statement that was made by Sun Tzu, The Art of War, which is really a book about business, but it essentially says, if you constantly play at war, meaning you constantly train, when you actually go to war, it will be like play. What he's really getting at is the better you train, the more a major incident simply becomes an event. And I'm also a scuba instructor. Some of you may know that, some of you don't. Actually a master scuba instructor. I've been doing it since 2002. And I train rescue divers and I train rebreather deep divers and all that. And I know, irrelevant. What is relevant is I train divers on what I say is, well, I ask them this question, and I'll ask you. What's the difference between an emergency and an event? Preparedness. An emergency is something that happens that you have no clue how to deal with and you're winging it. That's an emergency. An event is something you've practiced 100 times and it happens and muscle memory kicks in and you just deal with it. Rebreather, right? So you got this big system on and everything else, and you got what we call a bailout bottle, which is separate gas, and now something's going wrong with the rebreather and your CO2 concentration is too high. If you don't know what's going on, that's freaking you out. But if you realize that, oh, this is pretty simple, turn this, take this, put it in my mouth, push this button, and start breathing. Doesn't take very long, and I'm good. That's the difference between an emergency and an event. That's the difference between your IR response being an emergency or your IR response being an event. Does that resonate with any of you? So that's why these tabletop exercises are so important. Purple Team Ops, we're just gaining broader perspective. Purple Team is simply combining the perspectives of both the good guys and the bad guys, right? The red team are the bad guys, blue team are the good guys. We want to combine that all together and look at it as a whole. That's the purple team. Chaos engineering. I love being a chaos engineer. This is one of the reasons why people bring me in and they're all nice and they like me and everything. And then I start being the chaos engineer and they're like, you're never coming back here again, because I'm doing crap like that. Build a culture of readiness, sorry. And really, this is about that psychological safety again. Celebrate everything you can as a success rather than a failure. So yeah, we did an exercise and we missed a bunch of stuff. Don't go in and be like, well, you missed this and you should have done this and you should have done that, whatever. Go in and say, hey, we did a lot of great stuff, but let's sit down because I know we can make this better. Here's what we did really well. Lead with that. And then get into fixing the other stuff. Managing stress and burnout. You need to monitor your own stress actively. You know when your decisions start to go sideways better than anyone. But if you're a leader, you also need to watch for others. You should have things established. Even if you're a one-person team, you should be talking to your boss or whatever about things that you need. Like, hey, I will gladly work a 12-hour shift during a major incident, but I got to take a break at 12 hours. I got to go home and kiss the dog and slap the kids, or wait a minute, I said that backwards. Maybe not. I need sleep, those kind of things. And, you know, at Google, they have a mandatory 2-day off after a major incident for any responders. Paid, but you need to go take 2 days to decompress, right? You may not get that, but you might get 1 day off, right? Hey, boss, I worked 3 days, 12 hours a shift. All I did was, you know, took a shower, took a break, came back to work, whatever. I need a day to just sit in the park and reflect, whatever. So that's important. There are a number of slides in here that I'm going to blast through, but I want you to download. And then I'll include a PDF of my notes, because obviously I have a lot of notes in there, because I want you to go through different lessons from failure, right? This is data that I've collected through experience that I want to share with you, that I want you to not have to go through those same experiences. We have lessons from failure and communication breakdown, on a leadership vacuum, on over-reliance on tools. Oh, well, I have SolarWinds, I have FireEye, I have this, I have that. People become over-reliant. A manufacturing company, that's where a lot of my background is. Over 2 years, the team became way too dependent on their SIEM and other automated tools. And when they had an event and the SIEM failed, the people assigned as analysts couldn't interpret the logs. They had just gotten so used to the SIEM summarizing and doing all the dashboard and everything, they couldn't manually interpret the logs. That obviously was a problem. What does a maturity model look like? Well, level 1, like I said, starting kind of towards the bad team or whatever. We have just whatever, we'll deal with it when it happens, and I'll be the hero when I fix it. Level 2 is not really hard to accomplish. That's just the documented procedures and the defined roles. And then all the way down to 5, where we have full leadership understanding and support and predictive capabilities, right? We're proactive, not reactive. So the last thing that I want to talk about for a minute are quick wins you can implement now that cost you nothing. Because that's the number one pushback I get is, well, I can't get the budget or whatever. These are immediate improvements requiring no budget. First, I want you to go create a 1-page command checklist. The first 10 actions you or your team will take for any incident. Okay, I'm not talking a paragraph for each. I want you to summarize it into a single sentence, 10-item checklist. Then I want you to set up a dedicated team space or Slack if you use it or whatever, with an area with pinned templates like that checklist. I want you to document who backs up whom. Even if you're a one-person IT shop, you can document things like, well, my boss, the CFO, is going to be the communication liaison if I'm unavailable or whatever. Okay, doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't cost you anything. If you have an IT team of more than one, schedule a recurring 30-minute, you've heard of lunch and learns. Well, I call these what if Wednesdays. So schedule a what if Wednesday where you essentially go in and, create simple scenarios and then document the decision log that's made during these things, right? Where you have time, rationale, approver, the sort of thing. You can right now standardize handoffs. One-page document that covers, this is how we hand off different functions during an event. If an event lasts this long, then I am going to hand off my discovery role to this person, and I'm going to take over their role of communications. That's that role shift I talked about, where you're one, getting exposed to multiple perspectives of the incident. Two, not getting burnt out on any one area of the incident. And there's things that you would have documented that you want available during that handoff, like current state, active tasks, pending decisions, concerns, whatever. Again, not complicated. Doesn't cost you anything to do this. And I will tell you, remember I told you the number one reason incident response teams fail? What was it? Communication. These basics cut communication failures by 50%. Statistics show it. And they cost nothing. So with that, I've burned up my time. I thank everyone for being here, and I hope to see you around.